The headlights cut through the Texas darkness exactly at midnight, just as the WhatsApp messages had promised. 8 Mexican migrants huddled in the abandoned farmhouse, hearts racing with anticipation. This was it. The final pickup that would take them to Houston, to jobs, to new lives. Miguel pressed his face against the dusty window, watching the approaching vehicle. Something felt wrong about how perfectly timed it all was, but desperation had a way of silencing instincts. The journey had started 3 weeks earlier in Michoacan, where Miguel worked construction for wages that couldn't feed his 3 children. A friend had shared a WhatsApp contact, someone reliable who could arrange safe passage to Houston. The profile looked legitimate, with photos of successful crossings and voice messages in perfect northern Mexican Spanish. The price was steep but fair, $8,000 for guaranteed delivery to a safe house where employers were waiting. The WhatsApp coordinator, calling himself Alejandro, had been professional from the start. He sent detailed instructions through encrypted messages, always responding quickly to questions. He knew the routes, the timing, the exact places where Border Patrol was weak. His messages came with GPS pins, photos of landmarks, even weather forecasts. It felt more like dealing with a travel agent than a smuggler. Miguel wasn't alone in trusting Alejandro's operation. The group of 8 had been assembled carefully, all from the same region of Mexico, all with similar stories of economic desperation. There was Carlos, a mechanic whose shop had been destroyed by cartel extortion. The Ramirez brothers, farmers whose drought-stricken land could no longer support their families. Elena, a nurse whose daughter needed surgery available only in American hospitals. Ordinary people driven to extraordinary risks. They crossed the border 3 nights ago, following Alejandro's precise instructions. The crossing point was exactly where he'd marked it, a section of fence damaged by flooding, easy to navigate in darkness. On the other side, they'd found the supplies he'd promised. Water bottles, energy bars, a burner phone with 1 number programmed. Everything had been perfect, too perfect, but relief at successful crossing overshadowed any doubts. The farmhouse had been their sanctuary for 3 days. Another GPS pin from Alejandro, another promise kept. The building was abandoned but intact, with running water and mattresses on the floor. They were to wait here, he said, while transportation was arranged. Houston employers were particular about timing. The pickup would come at midnight on the 3rd day. Until then, stay inside, stay quiet, trust a plan. Those 3 days had passed in a strange suspended animation. They'd shared stories, cooked meals and provided supplies, dreamed aloud about American wages. Elena talked about her daughter's surgery, how she'd finally afford the treatment. The Ramirez brothers planned to save enough to buy new land, maybe in Texas where rain was more reliable. Carlos wanted to open his own shop, free from cartel interference. Miguel just wanted to send his children to school without choosing between education and eating. Alejandro's messages had continued throughout their wait, reassuring and specific. He sent photos of the vehicle that would pick them up, a white Ford pickup with construction equipment in back, perfect cover for transporting day laborers. He shared the driver's name, Roberto. Even a photo that showed a friendly-faced Mexican-American in his 40s. Every detail designed to build trust, to ease a natural paranoia of people hiding in a foreign country. On the 2nd night, something strange had happened. Elena noticed it first, a drone passing overhead, barely visible against the stars. It circled the farmhouse twice before disappearing. When they messaged Alejandro about it, he responded quickly. Border Patrol used drones, he explained, but they were looking for groups moving, not staying put. As long as they remained inside, they were invisible. His explanation made sense, dissolved their fears. Now, watching the headlights approach on schedule, Miguel felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread that came with trust placed in strangers. The vehicle matched Alejandro's photos perfectly. White Ford, construction equipment visible in the bed. It stopped exactly where he'd said it would, engine running. The driver's door opened and a figure stepped out, illuminated by the cab's interior light. But it wasn't Roberto. The man who emerged wore tactical gear, FBI clearly visible on his vest. More vehicles appeared from the darkness, SUVs with flashing lights that had been hidden, waiting. Agents poured out with practiced precision, surrounding the farmhouse before anyone inside could process what was happening. The midnight pickup had arrived exactly as promised, just not in the form they'd expected. Miguel's mind raced, trying to understand. Where was Alejandro? How had the FBI found them? Who had betrayed the operation? But as agents entered the farmhouse with weapons drawn but not aggressive, shouting commands in English and Spanish, a terrible realization began to dawn. The looks of confusion on the agents' faces as they secured each person, the way they seemed to be checking photos on phones, comparing faces to images. There had never been an Alejandro. The FBI operation, Miguel would learn during processing, had been running for months. Agent Martinez, posing as a helpful coordinator, had been building trust with dozens of groups across Mexico. Every WhatsApp message, every GPS coordinate, every reassuring voice note had come from a desk in El Paso. The drone hadn't been routine Border Patrol surveillance, but FBI reconnaissance confirming their targets were in place. The sophistication of the sting was breathtaking in retrospect. Agent Martinez had studied speech patterns from Michoacan, learned the slang, understood the economic pressures driving migration. His Alejandro persona had been crafted by psychologists who knew exactly what desperate people needed to hear. The photos of successful crossings were staged. The testimonials were written by other agents. Even the damaged fence at the border crossing had been deliberately left unrepaired as a funnel point. During interrogation, Miguel saw the full scope of what they'd walked into. Hundreds of pages of WhatsApp conversations, every message cataloged and analyzed. The FBI had tracked their phones from Mexico, watched their border crossing through night vision cameras, monitored their stay in farmhouse. They'd been not migrants sneaking through shadows, but actors performing on a stage they didn't know existed. The agent who questioned Miguel seemed almost apologetic. They weren't really interested in economic migrants, he explained. The operation targeted the smuggling networks, hoping to trace financial flows and organizational structures. But Alejandro's careful compartmentalization meant the migrants never knew enough to be useful. They were bait that hadn't attracted the sharks the FBI really wanted. One by one, the group was processed. Fingerprints, photographs, backgrounds checked against criminal databases. Elena wept as she explained her daughter's medical needs, showing worn photos of hospital bills. The Ramirez brothers sat in silent shock, their dreams of new farmland evaporating. Carlos kept asking how this was legal, how the government could lie so elaborately. The agents had no satisfying answers. The WhatsApp messages became evidence, each hopeful response now proof of illegal intent. Miguel watched Agent Martinez, the real man behind Alejandro, testify via video link. He looked nothing like the profile photos, sounded different without the affected accent. He explained his methods with professional detachment, how he'd identified potential migrants through social media monitoring, built trust through consistent communication, created an operation so seamless that no one questioned its authenticity. The farmhouse, it turned out, had been FBI property for years. The mattresses they'd slept on, the food they'd eaten, even the running water, all provided by the government to make the trap comfortable enough that targets would stay put. Other groups had passed through the same house, following the same instructions, meeting the same midnight fate. It was a machine for processing hope into deportation proceedings. Legal aid lawyers explained the situation was complicated. Entrapment defenses rarely worked in immigration cases. They'd crossed the border illegally before any FBI involvement. The sting had simply caught them, not caused them to commit crimes. Miguel and the others were looking at deportation with multi-year bans on reentry. Their dreams hadn't just failed, they'd been criminalized. The group was separated during detention, scattered to different facilities. Miguel heard later that Elena had been deported first, returned to Mexico with no money for her daughter's surgery, and now a criminal record that would bar legal immigration. The Ramirez brothers were sent back to their drought-stricken farm. Carlos disappeared into the detention system. The carefully assembled group dissolved as if it had never existed. In his cell, Miguel replayed every interaction with Alejandro, looking for signs he'd missed. But the performance had been perfect. Every message had hit the right tone of professional criminality, competent enough to inspire confidence, human enough to seem real. The FBI had weaponized trust itself, turned the natural human tendency to believe helpers into a trap more effective than any physical barrier. The deportation flight carried Miguel back to Michoacan 3 months after he'd left. The same poverty waited, made worse by the debt incurred for passage. His children still needed school fees. His family still needed food. But now he also carried the knowledge that even hope could be counterfeit, that the voice offering help might belong to someone documenting your dreams for use against you. He learned later that Operation Alejandro, as the FBI called it, had processed hundreds of migrants. The agency celebrated it as a disruption of smuggling networks, though most caught were just desperate people like his group. The real smugglers had learned to recognize FBI patterns, adapted their methods. Alejandro's WhatsApp profile disappeared, replaced by new coordinators who might or might not be real. Back in construction work, Miguel encountered others who'd been caught in similar stings. The FBI had multiple personas running. Friendly coordinators who spoke regional dialects perfectly, offered reasonable prices, provided detailed instructions that always led to custody. Technology had given law enforcement new tools for deception. Where once migrants only feared Border Patrol in the desert, now they had to doubt every digital interaction. The psychological impact was worse than the physical deportation. Miguel found himself unable to trust any online communication. Job offers, even in Mexico, seemed potentially fake. Anyone too helpful triggered suspicion. The FBI had successfully implanted paranoia that served their purposes better than any wall. If migrants couldn't trust coordinators, legitimate or otherwise, attempts would decrease. He thought often about Agent Martinez, the man who'd spent weeks building false intimacy through WhatsApp messages. Did he feel anything when typing encouragements to desperate people? When sending GPS coordinates to a trap? When crafting voice messages in fake accents? It was just a job, Miguel supposed, but what kind of person could perform such elaborate deception day after day? The farmhouse in Texas probably still stood, still received groups following midnight promises. New Alejandro sent new coordinates to new dreamers. The cycle continued with mechanical efficiency. Hope led to trust led to custody led to deportation. The FBI refined their techniques and migrants refined their suspicions. An arms race of deception fought in WhatsApp messages and GPS pins. Miguel never attempted another crossing. The $8,000 had been borrowed from extended family, and paying it back took years. But worse than the debt was the death of possibility. He'd learned that the pathways to better lives could be mirages, that helping voices could be hunting voices, that even successful border crossings could be allowed rather than achieved. Sometimes he received messages from unknown numbers, offering new routes, better prices, guaranteed success. He deleted them unread. They might be real smugglers or FBI agents or scammers or some hybrid of all three. In the digital age, deception had become so sophisticated that truth was indistinguishable from lies. The safest response was no response. The wisest trust was no trust. The construction wages in Michoacan remained inadequate. His children still needed things he couldn't provide. The problems that had driven him to attempt crossing persisted and deepened. But Miguel had learned that solutions could be traps, that midnight promises could bring flashing lights instead of freedom. He'd been caught not by walls or agents in the field, but by his own willingness to believe someone wanted to help. In quiet moments, he wondered about his fellow travelers. Did Elena ever find treatment for her daughter? Did the Ramirez brothers lose their land? Did Carlos rebuild his shop? They'd shared 3 days in an FBI-provided farmhouse, dreaming American dreams while agents monitored their every word. They'd been props in someone else's operation, their hopes harvested as intelligence data. The WhatsApp messages from Alejandro remained on his old phone, which authorities had returned after copying its contents. Sometimes Miguel scrolled through them, marveling at the craftsmanship of deception. Every emoji perfectly placed, every response timed to build trust. Agent Martinez deserved an acting award for his performance as a helpful criminal. He'd played his role so well that even knowing the truth, the messages still seemed genuine. Operation Alejandro eventually ended, replaced by new FBI initiatives with new technological tricks. But its legacy lived in the thousands who'd learned that crossing borders involved navigating not just physical spaces, but digital deceptions. The journey to America had always been dangerous. Now, it was also a hall of mirrors where saviors might be jailers and promised pickups might bring handcuffs instead of hope. Miguel's story ended where it began, in Michoacan, building for others while unable to build his own dreams. But he carried hard-won knowledge that midnight could bring betrayal disguised as deliverance, that FBI agents studied desperation like anthropologists, that sometimes the most dangerous moment in any journey was the moment you believed you were safe. The farmhouse in Texas had been real. Alejandro had been fiction. And somewhere between reality and deception, 8 lives had been processed through a system that counted them as statistics in a disruption operation that disrupted mostly hope itself.